are meant to protect women against gender-based violence and sexual harassment that happens in the workplace. South Africa is also a signatory to a number of regional and international laws, that are again meant to protect women. Most of these focuses on issues of gender equality. But I think even from the previous speakers, you could hear that, a patriarchy and gender inequality, breeds gender-based violence in our workplaces, in fact, in our society as a whole. So that is why, even the policies I'm going to be focusing on, are focusing on gender equality, but we need to always remember that it is absence of this equality that is leading to so much gender-based violence, and sexual harassment in our workplaces. So without further ado, let's go to our first slide. So in my first slide, I'm focusing on what basically is gender-based violence and sexual harassment. But, the previous speaker, Ndateshai, I think he's covered information on what specifically gender-based violence is and sexual harassment. But there are specific areas of emphasis I would like to mention, when I'm speaking about gender-based violence and sexual harassment. And one of those, when it comes to gender-based violence, we know that it includes physical violence. It could be sexual, it could be verbal, it could be emotional, it could be psychological abuse, but we must also remember that even threats, that are related to these acts that I've just mentioned are also under gender-based violence. You are already, if you are threatening someone to commit this, to do this to them, to do that them, you are already violating that woman. So I think this is what we need to remember in our places, that even if someone threatens a certain behavior, you have to report them, because that is already violence. It is already gender-based violence. Another point of emphasis when it comes to sexual harassment, I'm not going to read these definitions, but another point of emphasis when it comes to sexual harassment, people, they always think that sexual harassment, someone has to touch you, they have to, for it to be sexual harassment, they have to say something, but even the looks that a person gives you, the unwanted look, someone looking at you as if he's already undressing you, that is already sexual harassment. So you can even report someone who has done that, and you have been warning this person against this behavior, but they keep on persisting. You can report them, because that is already sexual harassment. It does not have to end to it being physical, to it being verbal, someone saying anything or touching you and so forth. That is already sexual harassment, and you need to report it. In my next slide, what I'm talking about, it's exactly what I've just covered. It's sexual harassment being physical, verbal. It could even be written notes that are returned to you, someone sending you explicit text, with pictures of, so forth and so forth. So we must always remember that a person does not have to touch you, or say something, or even write to you and give you all these pictures, but even by just looking at you in a unwanted, those unwanted sexual looks, that is already sexual harassment, and you have the right to report that. In my next slide, I talk about, who are, one of the things we need to note, like Ndateshai has already indicated, there is no written sign, that says this is a person, is a prospective predator. There's nothing written, So a person, these people that I've just listed here, they could be victims, but they could even be perpetrators of sexual harassment in the workplace. It could be the employer, the managers, it could be the supervisor, the actual employee. It could even be an employee sexually harassing their supervisor. Though we've had a number of those cases, even from the previous NGOs that I've worked with, we dealt with cases where a woman would come in, he's a supervisor of this person, but she is being harassed by someone who is reporting to her. And the workplaces in most of these instances, they have not listened to that woman. So that woman would come, to the institution that is outside so that she can get assistance and advice. Sexual harassment can be even, the volunteers. We've heard of cases, a person who's not even paid by the organization, but they are being harassed sexually by someone in this institution. Even job applicants, we've heard of so many cases where people will be promised positions, in exchange for sleeping with someone who is not even involved in some cases with the recruitment process. Interns, we've had so many cases in almost all provinces where interns are being, again, promised this and that in exchange for them sleeping with these men. It could even be learners, and then in this sector of education, obviously learners are victims. We've heard of all the speakers that have already spoken have indicated this issue around learners being victims of sexual harassment, even up to them getting pregnant, being raped and so forth and so forth. Clients, suppliers, contractors, any other person who are people who are dealing with the institutions, they can be sexually harassed. In my next slide, I focus on the policies, the laws that the country has, some of the laws that the country has, that are there, in order to ensure that, we live in freedom, with human dignity, And then one of those is our constitution, I think the minister has already spoken about this, our South African institution, specifically the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights. It speaks about human dignity. Everyone, has the right to human dignity, to equality and freedom. So even by our institution indicates that, everyone is free and everyone is equal, meaning that no one has the right to violate another person based on them being a female. We also have got Employment Equity Act, again, that act focuses on issues of equity, in the workplace. Equity, colleagues, is more than just equality, because equity kind of equalizes the play field, So employment equity has got a specific requirements there that have to ensure that the workplace is about equity. It forces organizations, it forces institutions to ensure that the policies that are adopted, the procedures, the practices that are adopted ensure fair treatment of everyone within the organization, but specifically the previously designated groups, in order to ensure that the playing field is leveled. Within the employment equity plan, there's also this thing that was released. It's called the Code of Good Conduct for handling of sexual harassment in the workplace. That, colleagues, is a very important guideline, because for all organizations, it gives guidance on how issues of sexual harassment have to be handled. It indicates the responsibility of an institution to ensure that there are sexual harassment policies in place. And these policies are not just there, but they are known by everyone, But also when a sexual harassment case happens, if a case happens, then the employer responds according, in a certain way. It even gives it guides that employers need to even have time frames against which they have to respond to someone who has reported sexual harassment. This, colleagues, is a very important guideline for institutions, because from looking at so many institutions and reviewing their policies, one of the things that is so evident is, the fact that sexual harassment policies are either not there, or they are just pieces of policies that are kept in a corner where no one knows about them. Even women in the organizations do not know about this policy. So one of the responsibilities for the employer when it comes to this code of good conduct is that the employer has got the responsibility to ensure that these sexual harassment policies are in place, they are up to date, and everyone in the organization knows about them. Another strategy that that was approved by the cabinet in March 2020, we've got the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Again, our National Strategic Plan also focuses on the workplace, specifically Pillar 1 of the National Strategic Plan, because one of the key interventions that are there, that is prioritized is the workplace that is free from violence. Employers are expected, again, just like when it comes to the code of good conduct for handling harassment under Employment Equity Act. Pillar 5 requires that employers ensure that there's an environment that is that prevents gender-based violence, that ensures that the workplace is a place where there's equal opportunities, there's equity in opportunities, but also people are free to effectively work, develop their potential, a place where there is sexual harassment policies and they are acted on. When sexual harassment happens, it is acted on. I can't finish, colleagues, this presentation without mentioning specifically this month of August, the HOD's 8 Principles Action Plan, for promoting women's empowerment and gender equality within the public services workplace. Again, colleagues, you will see that some of these policies that I've just spoken about, they do not only focus on issues of gender-based violence. The reason is that, one of the acknowledgements is that gender inequality in the workplace, patriarchy, breeds gender-based violence. It breeds this sexual harassment that is happening in the workplace. So that is why it is important for all women, in the workplace to understand, what policies are there, when it comes to the issues of when it comes to the issues of gender equality. Because one of the reasons why these people would sexual predators and do all these things is because they believe that women are lesser of human beings. Women, they objectify women. So it's very important as a woman to understand what mechanisms are there, in our country to ensure that, that there is equality. I am also protected as a woman in the workplace. So I have mentioned specifically these HOD principles because they are supposed to be focusing on the empowerment of women, and the issues of gender equality in the workplace. So there are specific areas, that each workplace is supposed to be focusing on, in order to ensure that there is equity in the workplace and all employees, specifically women, are treated, in an equitable way. So the specific focus areas of the HOD principles are transformation. Are there policies in the workplace that ensure that there is transformation? If there are mostly males in leadership position, in technical position, what plans are being made by the institution in order to ensure that there is transformation, not only when it comes to policies, but when it comes to representation in key positions, when it comes to the policies, the procedures within the organization. I've spoken about the establishment of policy environment, creating an enabling environment. They focus on gender mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming is about adoption of gender lens. Whenever there is a policy, whether it be with the Department of Education, whether it be at the learner level, or whether it be at the management at the institution level, it is important that organizations adopt a gender lens. Meaning, you ask yourself a question: how is this policy going to affect women, versus men differently? Because when you begin to answer that question, you would come up with policies that are both beneficial to both genders. The assumption here is that our work environments are patriarchal. I think we all agree, about that. But if we are in that environment of patriarchy, obviously the policies that are going to come up, if we don't have gender mainstreaming, then whatever policies or procedures that come up are obviously going to favor men. So that is why in our organization it's important that there is always a gender lens that is applied, whether you are deciding on a policy, whether you are deciding on a on a procedure or on a practice, and so forth and so forth. So other areas, focus areas that departments are expected to report on are issues of empowerment, provision of adequate resourcing and monitoring and evaluation. In my next slide, colleagues, I also talk about the international instruments, and the regional instruments that South Africa is a signatory to. Most of these instruments, colleagues, are focusing on issues of equality, whether it be in the workplace and in our society in general. Now, I've just listed them, colleagues, because my main intention here is not just to lecture on these policies, what people can read, during their own time, but they need to know what South Africa is a signatory to. Because if as a country we are a signatory to a certain instrument, then we are required to do things according to the requirements of these instruments. And most of these instruments are focusing on gender equality. Some of these, we've got CEDAW, we've got Beijing Platform of Action for Action, we've got Resolution 1325, we've got Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 5, specifically focusing on gender equality. We've got Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, So, colleagues, we are a signatory to all of these international instruments, and South Africa is required to report, progress against all of these instruments. So it is important, I've included these, colleagues, in this presentation, because it is important that, as women, we understand the obligations of our country, to equality, not only to the citizen itself, but internationally. We have agreed that we will make sure that the environment is equitable. We will, women will be protected. Workplaces will be productive places where everyone is equal and has got their they are realizing their potential. The last one, colleagues, there I have covered is called ILO Convention 190. We usually call it just C190. This one, South Africa is in the process of ratifying it. I think the convention now is in the process of being looked at by the National Assembly. It has gone through portfolio committees, National Council of Provinces, and so forth and so forth. So this specifically the ILO, this last convention, it specifically focuses on women, in the workplace, prevention, and ensuring that workplaces are an environment that is free from violence. And it does not only focus on full-time, but it focuses on all kinds of employment, despite whatever type of contract, that whether you are permanent, you are an intern, you are a volunteer, and so forth and so forth. My next slide focuses on steps that one needs to take. These steps are not exhaustive, but it's just for me, I think the most critical steps that you need to take, in a case where you find yourself being a victim of sexual harassment in the workplace. We start with firstly understanding the workplace policies on gender-based violence and sexual harassment. When I'm saying understanding your policies, you need to understand what the responsibilities of the employer. What does the policy say about the responsibility of the employer? What are the grievance procedures? But not only that, colleagues, what are the timeframes? Because if you report a sexual harassment, you need to understand from the beginning how long am I going to wait for me to be able to get response when it comes to, what are the various steps that are going to be taken, the various disciplinary actions that are taken. You need to understand that there's a formal and there are informal procedures, of reporting sexual harassment. It is very important, colleagues, to understand these issues, because many women, I've worked in this organization, especially in the NGOs and the Commission for Gender Equality. One of the common problems is that women would report sexual harassment in their workplaces, but you'd find that those workplaces, they retaliate. They apply all forms of reaction. They would either come up with a claim against that woman to indicate that they have been involved in this kind of act or a corrupt activity. They are being insubordinate, and so forth and so forth. So it is very important that before you even report sexual harassment, you understand what your policy says. But also take into cognizance those policies that I've mentioned earlier on, what the employment equity says, what the code of good conduct says, in terms of what sexual harassment policies are supposed to be like, all the policies within our country, because whatever policy an organization adopts, it cannot contradict what is in our constitution when it comes to your right to freedom, when it comes to your right to human dignity, and when it comes to your right to equality. It can never compromise that. So you must understand your policies in relation to those policies, but also if you see that there are discrepancies, there is a compromise of your freedom, there is a compromise of your equality in these policies, those again need to be challenged. Understand the role of the employer in protecting you, even after reporting. If before reporting and even after reporting, the employer has the role to ensure that you as a victim, you are protected. That if a perpetrator retaliates against you, there are actions that are supposed to be taken against the perpetrator. Again, do not be afraid of asserting yourself when you feel that someone is violating you in any way or even sexually harassing you. But one thing I can also add here, even when you see someone else being harassed, one of the things you need to do is to even address that person, the person who's being addressed, harassed. Are you comfortable with this? You need to, so that we ensure that because other women are in the workplaces, but we are. What I can say is we are in different states, in different psychological states. So it is important that when you see a harassment happening, do something. I think Ndatasha also indicated that, it's not just about, protecting yourself, knowing it for yourself, but making sure that even other women who are in the same table as you, you ask them, are you comfortable with this act, this that is being done by so-and-so, So report harassment as soon as it happens, because if you don't report it, chances are it's going to happen again and again, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And one of the main things that is being reported, almost all cases of sexual harassment, when someone is being harassed, in fact, even gender-based violence in general, it affects the self-esteem, the self-confidence of a person. We've had cases, where a woman would be coming to report a case of sexual harassment, that is not being dealt with in her workplace. And you would see that this woman, she has, it's like she has lost her self-esteem. She's not even sure of her experiences. She's not even sure if she's just being full of nonsense or these things are real, So it is very important that you report sexual harassment as soon as it happens, because if you don't report it and it keeps on happening, it eats up on you, your self-esteem, your self-confidence. You begin to doubt yourself. When you report, also make sure that you record. You record your correspondence up to even keeping the records of what you are reporting in a separate place. We've had incidences where women would report cases of sexual harassment. The next thing, the following week after they have reported, their house would be burglared, the computer, their PC would be taken, their handbag would be taken, and all the information is gone. So it is very important that you record, but make sure that you've got records that you keep even in other secluded places. If there is no progress within your institution, you have the right to go outside your workplace to report. Now you are reporting both the harassment and the workplace that is not responding, to the case that you have reported. Have someone to talk to, preferably someone outside the institution. Because, colleagues, that is very important. I've indicated that sexual harassment, what it does, it eats up on you. I usually say it actually challenges the material you are made of. So that is why it is important that you have someone to talk to. someone who's going to say, this thing, because you begin to doubt yourself when you are harassed, when you are abused in the work. Hostile workplaces, affect people very negatively. They take everything out of you. So it is very important that you be able to talk about your experiences to someone else who is outside that workplace, because usually someone who's within the workplace, they are usually part of I would say even part of the furniture, up to even being part of the problem. So it is important that you've got someone to talk to, including getting counseling, just to get yourself back. In the following slides that I'm going to be covering, I'll be talking about how to empower yourself now, not with only, about education in terms of the policies within your education, the policies of the country, but how you handle yourself as a person, as a woman in this institution. Because even if you have not been sexually harassed in a workplace, chances are in future you may be harassed. So that harassment needs to find you in a certain position where you are able, you are so hard that you are able to defend yourself, about defending yourself, but also you have strength as a person. Because as I indicated earlier on, colleagues, sexual harassment and gender-based violence in the workplace, it leads to yourself doubting yourself, it leads to low self-esteem. It leads, you even have, some women have reported suicidal thoughts and so forth and so forth. And obviously, if you've got low self-esteem, obviously your performance would be affected. So in my next slide, I speak about specific things that you can do, up to even self-care, the self-care that you can do, and also and so forth and so forth. Firstly, women's your access to support. The external forums that you can surround yourself. One of the things that's usually said is that, women, they need to surround themselves with giants. Just like men have boys clubs, women are also supposed to have their own clubs. In most cases, women, they just focus on their work and their family, because all those two things, they take up all your time. But one of the things we realize is that the moment as a person you only focus on work, on your family, you become isolated. You could easily become a target of abuse, a defenseless target of abuse. So that is why it is important that women become part of various associations, whether they are sector-orientated, work-orientated, sector-orientated, like the women's business clubs, women's management forums, the association self-development clubs, sectors related to women's club, and so forth, even up to even support groups. We need to be part of something that is out there, structures that are already out there. So as firstly, to break the isolation, because the more a person is isolated, the more, they could easily become a target of abuse. Because one of the things that perpetrators do, whether it's gender-based violence or sexual harassment, what they do is they make you to doubt yourself. They make you to lose, whatever they do, it results in the loss of self-esteem. So you don't even trust your experiences, you don't even trust your way of thinking. So it is very important that women become part of these forums. We have our own clubs, whereby we talk about our experiences, we bounce off ideas with others, So the purpose of this association would be basically just to share experiences, I've made an example here specifically about unequal treatment, and solutions with regards to that. When you operate in a patriarchal environment, there are so many behaviors that are there that affect you very negatively. Let me just make an example. One of the people in these clubs made an example that, she's part of a management, a senior management in her own organization. So she was saying to us, in our boardroom meeting, before we start a meeting, men would be talking. I think there's only about 2 of them as women in a group of 10 senior management of this organization, including the CEO. So he would say that before the start of the meeting, you would hear men, they were talking, how are you, and they call each other by either nickname or clan name and so forth and so forth. But when it comes, when the meeting has to start and the time comes for her to do a presentation, they will say, let's say, I'll make an example, Nomsa, please do this presentation, So this is unequal treatment, and it is not as socially friendly as the treatment that they would be giving each other before the meeting, So these are the things we need to be talking about. We need to understand, that we are operating in a patriarchal environment. And therefore, that implies that we need to be empowering ourselves in a certain way, to be prepared for this kind of hostile environment, but not only to be prepared, for the hostile environment, be in a position to address it, So if you are members of these, of these bigger groups, now you will begin to understand that your experiences, you are not just full of nonsense, when you are getting affected negatively by this hostile environment, it's not just because of you, but it is just the environment, and it is affecting you this way, and this is how you can deal with that environment. You get to share solutions, you are making suggestions, you are sharing experiences with regards to how so and so has managed to deal with this kind of treatment, So these social groupings, they also provide link to places of help and opportunities, obviously through sharing of information. You get to understand what is available, where can I access support when it comes to this thing that I'm starting, when it comes to supporting me, with this area of my life and so forth. It is also about sharing of resources. It is about mentorship and coaching, because no matter how far up you go as a leader, and as a woman, in fact, as anyone, you still need coaching, because a coach, they kind of hold you accountable to the plans that you have made. You can even need coaching when it comes to basic things like how do I assert myself, what are the coping mechanisms that I can adopt, how to even exit your current job, starting a business venture. So you always need that support, even if you are in a leadership position. Mentorship is about a provision of support in a specific technical area that you want to improve on, So, but another thing we are saying here is that you always need to understand that you are operating in a patriarchal environment, and by virtue of it being patriarchal, it is hostile, So there are certain things, there are certain ways you need to empower yourself in order to make sure that you are prepared for it, but also to ensure that you are addressing it as you are going along. In my next slide, I continue with the issue of self-development. And there I specifically focus on personal development. Again, colleagues, this is one area that as women we ignore, because it takes up a lot of time. It takes up, with the time we dedicate our time in our work, we dedicate our time with our children and our families. We always forget, the issue of personal development. And yet this is supposed to be a lifetime pursuit. Now, colleagues, the reason why I am including the issues of personal development in empowering women against gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the workplace, it's because sexual harassment, gender-based violence takes up everything from you. It takes away your self-esteem. It takes away your confidence, and in some cases, you even begin to even forget the things. When you don't have, you've got low self-esteem. It does not matter how far up you are. You begin to forget even the things you know about. Hence, it is always important to be continuously building yourself, continuously, because these are the things that are going to be continuously working on your confidence, because you gain a mastery in one area of your life, it produces confidence in other areas of your life. So the issue of personal development, you need to prioritize it in your finances. In terms of budgeting for it, you need to be buying the books that you enjoy reading. You need to be attending courses, anything that you enjoy doing, in order to make sure that you are continuously developing yourself. Another thing that we usually speak about, in these groups, is the issue of self-discovery. This, for me, is one of the most liberating experiences that anyone, can can access, because as a person, the moment you get to understand your personal vision, your personal mission, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, it's like you become indestructible, because in many cases people, perpetrators in workplaces, they always thrive on noting your weaknesses. They would say that you are useless, because you have not agreed to their advances, their sexual advances. They can become, they would say you are weak, you are not able to do this, you are not able to do that, Now, if that kind of violence come to someone who fully understands themselves, who knows what they are about and what they are not about, who knows what their weaknesses are, and who knows that these are my weaknesses, but this is what I am doing to manage my weaknesses. And these are my strengths, and this is what is important to me, and this is not what is important to me. If a harasser comes to that kind of person, they've got yeah. So it is very important that you also focus on yourself, in order to make sure that you build on a daily basis, you build a better you have strength, and resilience to stand against the hostility, and violence in our workplaces. Introspect about each of your day, what has happened, what have you done right, what can you improve on, what is hostile in your work environment, who are the sources of this hostility, how can you, and all the relationships that you need. It is very important, because colleagues, in self-introspection is a source of growth. You can be in an organization that is hostile, that is violent towards you, without you, and on you trying to, on your, doing your best, working 3 times more than everyone else just to prove yourself, But if you don't introspect, and you can go around in circle in years and not grow to that process. But if you introspect, colleagues, you will then get to realize these issues of hostility, the sources of this hostility, and what you can do, to ensure that you effectively deal with them. Pursuing of other personal interests. Here, I'm not just only talking about hobbies, colleagues. You are more than your job. So when there is hostility in your work environment, understand that this is just, you are more than your job. This is not your whole life. You've got interests, you've got talents that are not even tapped on by the organization that you are working in. So colleagues, again, it is important that people get to remember this, and they get to also focus on these other personal interests, because these are the things that give you confidence. These are the things that enable you to remember, to continuously remember your value, to continuously remember, that you are so and so. These are your strengths, and this is what is important to you, and this is what is not important to you. Continuing to the next slide, colleagues, I have not covered all the issues around self-development. I've just selected a few issues that we could discuss in, during this. There are so many other areas that a person, that we can look at in order to ensure that we are building this resilient person who is going to be able to stand not only against gender-based violence and sexual harassment, but against the hostility, that is in the workplace. The issue of, this are the issue of 100% work-life balance. It has been discussed a lot. I've attended so many sessions, with the issue of work-life balance, especially when it comes to women. And, one of the realization is that, one of the things that I usually say to people is that you must be careful to ensure that this thing of pursuing work-life balance does not result to guilt. Because the moment you feel guilty about the fact that you are not doing enough at home, or you are not doing enough at work, you become susceptible to harassment, whether you become harassment at home or in the workplace. One of the things that Sheryl Sandberg says I think in one of his books, he says that the world thinks that women want to own everything. We want, we want to own everything, and the reality is that most women are afraid of losing everything. When you've got a sick child at home, you are staying at home because of a sick child, you are guilty because you are not at work. You are not doing 1, 2, 3, and 4. When you are at work and something happens at home, you become guilty because you are not at home, because you were supposed to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is the basis against, that is why she is saying that, is that women in most cases are just afraid of losing everything, and they are trying their best to make sure that their input is felt at home, their input is felt in the workplace, but in that process, that generates a lot of guilt, because anything that goes wrong in the workplace, you feel very guilty. The moment that happens, you become a candidate for abuse in the workplace. Whether it be work hostility or even up to even gender-based one. So it is very important, colleagues, for us to understand that life is about making choices. You are a mother, you are you are an employee, you are a wife, but choices need to be made based on your circumstances. And there are consequences for each of the choices that you make. So what you need to do as a person, now that you've made this choice, you have to introduce mechanisms to manage, your life in line with the choices that you have made. Understand the context of patriarchy and how it relates to the way you are treated at work, in the workplace. For women, success does not correlate to likability. Again, in the same book, one of the things that is said, usually if you are a woman who is successful and you are seen to be ambitious, those women are usually seen as arrogant, as aggressive, and not team players, and difficult to work with. The moment you display ambition, you are successful, you are focused, you know exactly what needs to be done, and you advise people accordingly, you are not regarded in success, as you are not like. So these are the things that we need to understand, but these are the things that are not supposed to get us down, because these are directly linked to hostility and mostly gender-based violence in the workplace. Taking compliment, colleagues, that is not putting yourself down, hanging around progressive people, we call them giants. It is related, colleagues, to the point that I made earlier on, surrounding yourself with those kinds of people who are giants, people who are not necessarily going to put you down, who are going to say, when you see an opportunity and you say, I've seen this opportunity, they are going to say, I know so-and-so who's already doing this. Why don't you look up with so-and-so and so-and-so, depending on something. This is my last point, but I think for me, it is the most important. We need to depend on something that is even greater than ourselves and the colleagues that are surrounding. That is very important, colleagues, because there are times where you will fail, where people around you will fail you. So it is during those circumstances that we need to ensure that we are depending on something else that is bigger than ourselves. Something that we can hang out, we can hang on to, and even in my cases, I would even say no weapon formed against me shall prosper. All those things we need to be hanging on something that is bigger than ourselves. So colleagues, that's the end of my presentation. I have not covered everything, colleagues, but I have just covered things that I think that are essential. There are so many other, self-care activities that you can practice. There are so many other self-development initiatives that you can ensure that you tap on, in order to make sure that you become a better version of yourself. You become this tough person that is required by work, that is able to stand against work hostility and challenge gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nabo. That was really empowering. I want to believe that all the women who have joined us today, including men, they have been empowered. You could hear that you are really speaking from the heart. Thank you so much for those empowering words and really the information that we have shared with us. We will make sure that it goes down to all other participants who have joined us, and even those that could not join us. Thank you so much. Colleagues, let's soldier on. We will then call upon Me'ela Mukhalane, who is the CEO of the South African Council for Educators, who will then be talking to us about the ethical conduct of educators in combating GBV and sexual harassment in a workplace. Me'ela Mkhalane is the CEO of SACE, like I've indicated, having served the institution as a manager responsible for professional development and research, and later then promoted to the position of senior manager professional development at the same institution. She has also served in various structures, such as the ETDP SITA board, University of Free State Faculty of Education, Academic Advisory Board, Africa Federation of Teaching, Regulatory Authorities, Executive Board member, Steering Committee member for the establishment of the ETDP SITA and others. Memokhalane holds master degree in management, specializing in public policy, and master degree in education, educational management and leadership. Memokhalane, we are all yours. Let's hear what SACE has to say to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings to the Minister, our Deputy Minister, our MECs that are here on the virtual platform, including our teacher union leaders and our colleagues in the Department of Basic Education. I'm trying to... Can I request that I be assisted with the presentation? There is something blocking the area where I'm supposed to be dealing with the cursor.
Yes, ma'am, we'll run it from our side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you can move to the next slide. One of the things that Council is doing is to make sure that we really begin to inspire a credible teaching profession. I think you've heard the presentation that was made by Dr. Shai in particular, and also the introductory remarks by the DM and also the Minister, that we have some challenges within the teaching profession with regard to issues around sexual misconduct, but also around gender-based violence. And therefore, we need to be inspiring a credible teaching profession. And in doing that, we need to be protecting the integrity of the teaching profession through ensuring that our members of the profession are maintaining both the professional and ethical standards. I don't want to talk about ethical standards in isolation from the professional standards, because there is a relationship between the two. And you'd also agree with me that the entire public service is being professionalized. Also, the public service is looking at a broader process of building trust within the state institutions and also your public entities. And therefore, we are also saying we need to be building, professionalizing the teaching profession. We need to be making sure that we build trust within the teaching profession and have an ethical teaching profession, have a developmental teaching profession, and also a capable teaching profession whose status, whose esteem, and also whose prestige is not dented by these issues around gender-based violence and also sexual harassment. And therefore, when you can move to the next slide. When we talk about making sure that we inspire a credible teaching profession, we need to do that from an inclusivity and equality based that is based on gender, sexual orientation, and identity. Because you know that within the teaching profession, we've got over 60% of females who are teachers, and less than around 40% and all that we having the male. However, despite these gender issues that we're seeing, the statistics and all that, we are continuing to have challenges in terms of our female educators being harassed, experiencing gender-based violence, but not only those, but also our girl children. You can move. In terms of trying to contextualize the issue of sexual harassment and GBV in the world of work from an ethical perspective, I've already indicated who is involved in this gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the world of work. I think from the previous speakers who emphasized the issue of patriarchy, you'd realize that obviously, because of those stereotypes, because of what we're experiencing in the profession, we have male teachers on female learners, which is in the majority. Even from the videos that we saw this morning, we continue to see that kind of a challenge. But also male teachers on female teachers as colleagues. There are issues around that. We are seeing a prevalence of something that Shai mentioned of sodomizing the boy child. And because our focus as a country in terms of our interventions has been more on the girl child, I know also from the Department of Basic Education and provinces, we're beginning to look into how do we also, from a gender perspective, begin to assist our boy children. Also, in terms of our statistics, even though the majority of the perpetrators are more in terms of males, but you continue to see a trend of female educators that are abusing the boy children. And even more painful in terms of something that we are not looking at within the profession as a whole is also looking at educators on fellow LGBTQI educators and learners. We have a situation just in the last 2 weeks of a boarding school in KZN where an educator wanted to make sure that indeed this child is of a particular gender or not, and requiring that particular learner to open up her legs so that she can inspect the particular learner. Those are the things that we are saying. We cannot be continuing to accept within the teaching profession and go on as if nothing is happening. But also, who are the victims of this gender-based violence and also sexual harassment? And I'm looking at it from an ethical perspective and also from a professional perspective. We need to look at it, like other speakers have already said, on both sex and gender, on both women and men, and also boys and girls. However, we also need to acknowledge that mostly affected groupings in the profession will be women, it will be girls generally, and girls in special needs schools in particular. Again, this is another worrying trend that we are seeing, our deaf, blind, autism, and physically challenged children that are being harassed in schools, special education needs schools, in terms of them not being able to do anything. I mean, if you are really abusing a blind child, you are abusing a deaf child who cannot even say anything to save her life, then what are we saying ourselves in terms of the profession that we are in? But also, as I've already indicated, the gender or non-confirming educators in terms of gender within our schools. Next slide. This is just to show the issue that I was referring to earlier on, to say we're beginning to see a female coming up in terms of abusing or harassing or practicing violence against our male learners within the teaching profession. And you can see that the ratio, it's like your 7% female and also 93% a male. These are the statistics that we took just from 1st April 2020, when the COVID-19 started, up to 31st July 2021, so that you can see that despite the fact that we're having COVID-19 pandemic, thinking that schooling is not taking place that much, we continue to have these issues. And I think this also might correlate with the issues that we are seeing in terms of the learners that are also getting pregnant in high numbers within the teaching profession, although we are not assuming that those can be attributed to educators only, but the sexual activities, the sexual harassment, abuse, gender-based violence, as the president has declared it as a second pandemic, continues to take place within the country, but also within our schooling institutions, again, irrespective of whether schooling is taking place or not. And again, we need to have different kinds of intervention in terms of dealing with ethical issues and professional issues from that particular perspective. Next. What I did not go into the statistics for each of these areas, but also just to show you the prevalence in terms of what constitutes gender-based violence and sexual harassment, including bullying in the workplace. And I'm looking at this from educator on educator perspective, but also on educator and learner perspective. There are a whole lot of issues around physical violence, which is physical assault on the basis of gender. And I'm not talking generally about administering corporal punishment or that. There are also issues around stabbing. We just went to 2 schools in the last 2 weeks just to address the issue of educator on educator stabbing that is happening in 2 schools that are adjacent to one another. There are issues around shooting. Again, there's a case that we are dealing with that just recent around this area, and also issues around murder and threatening to kill. If you think that these issues are happening in families only or in communities only, they also come into the schooling environment in terms of what we see here. But there are also psychological or emotional violence that is happening, and a whole lot of issues around intimidation, around humiliation, around victimization, and unjustified discrimination on the basis of gender, and not any other thing else. And there are issues around sexual misconduct that we've already spoken about, but the one area that we need to pay special attention on is also the issue of cyberspace sex, issues of sex texting that are beginning to contribute more in terms of your sexual harassment. We've been doing it physically around being seen and all that, but it's been becoming rife with social media, with the technology that we're having, and also around the LGBTQI community. The issue of people working on statutory rape, and also the issues of corrective rape, which I don't know how do you correct somebody's sexual orientation in terms of that corrective measure. But again, you know, we've got a whole lot of issues around sexual relationship with learners broadly within the schooling environment. And if you check the sexual misconduct related areas, sexual harassment is #1. And also followed by the sexual relationship with learners. Yes, we do have issues, obviously, where sexual activities are involved. It also amounts to statutory rape, which we also have to be looking at and dealing with as we continue. Next slide. And having looked at all these issues that are gender-based related, that are sexual harassment related, I like the quotation by Mahatma Gandhi, which says, "I object to violence because when it appears to do good on somebody who," I like the minister would always like to say, she doesn't understand the 2 minutes enjoyment that is satisfying a man and being happy, while somebody from a violence perspective, that good is only temporary, but the evil it does on that particular child, on that particular female educator or boy child, it's permanent. And we've heard what Mrs. Nomsa has just said just now, that the psychological and psychosocial and emotional impact and effect on the gender-based violence and also on sexual harassment is immense. You can't even deal with it because it's a scar that remains with you for life. And we're also highlighting from the people that we are dealing, or the educators that we are dealing with, these are some of the issues that they would go through. And I know in Pretoria, you will hear there's a psychiatric hospital, one psychiatric hospital that people will tell you, if you go there, you will find a whole lot of educators. And it's because of the depression, the mental illness, educators not being well, and generally because of these issues, you end up having a wounded teaching profession that is experiencing all these issues. And from the children's perspective, the learners, you then have absenteeism, you have dropped out from schooling because they can't afford to face tomorrow, they can't afford to face other children. We do have an educator who went through serious bullying. However, she was not willing to report until she was assisted. And again, the issue that systems are indicated earlier on, reporting is very important. Many of these issues are there, but there's no reporting that's taking place, or there's under-reporting that we're seeing in terms of the few cases that we are dealing with. Can move to the next one. And therefore, from while system size dealt with the legal issues, with the treaties and whatever that